Welcome to It's a Controls Problem, where we do precision guesswork based upon unreliable data given to us by those of questionable knowledge. I'm your host, Charles Johnson. All right. Hello and welcome, everyone, to Season 2 of It's a Controls Problem. I am your host, Charles Johnson. I'm here with producer and best friend extraordinaire, Matthew Vanberg. Matthew, how are you?
I am doing swimmingly.
Yeah, it has been a while. Been several months that we've done it. And here we have a very special guest today. Some of you may know him on LinkedIn and probably some other various platforms. We have the co-founder of Ace IoT, Andrew Rodgers. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Really appreciate y'all reaching out and excited to chat today.
Yeah, no, the pleasure is absolutely all of ours here. So no, it's always I'm always appreciative of people coming in and taking time out of their busy days to talk to us two lowly people on the totem pole. So, Andrew, what is Ace IoT?
Good question. I think it's evolving as we speak. If you'd asked me this a year or so, or maybe 2 years ago, I would have just said we're an IDL platform. And I think where we're landing and where it seems like the market is landing is no one really wants an IDL. An IDL is an independent data layer for folks who aren't as terminally smart building as some of us. Folks only want an independent data layer if it's solving some problem for them. And Ace has built over the last 7 years that we've been in business, going on 8, a deep expertise in OT systems and OT networks. And so really what we do as a company is we have software and technology that is integrates with building systems and liberates data, but we also have the expertise and the team to make that happen in a building, even if that building maybe doesn't have the best systems in place yet. We do a lot of work with like monitoring-based commissioning providers in brownfield buildings where we're going into a building, either not always brownfield, but a lot of times they're existing buildings that maybe have lots of different systems glommed together over the years. Sometimes it's new buildings that unfortunately we as an industry I don't think have really mastered commissioning the digital side of our systems super well yet. So we help a lot with getting that initial network architecture problems resolved, getting data flowing where it needs to flow, and then making sure that network remains resilient and reliable for ideally the lifetime of the building.
Well, good. Well, thank you for that intro. And I'm going to go in and just start asking some questions here. So, very few people actually dreaming of being in the building automation system or being in the BAS world or system integration. I know I'm I am definitely the opposite of that because I was kind of bred for controls. But can you take us back to the beginning? Was there like a specific series of events or decisions that pulled you out of the broader tech world and landed you into smart buildings?
I don't know, but I think that has to be your LinkedIn tagline from now on. Bred for controls. Charles Johnson, bred for controls. It reminds me, as one does over the holidays, I ended up stuck on a couch with family watching a Hallmark movie. And, the dreamy protagonist is talking about how, as a child, he was always very interested in the stock market. That was their explanation of, how the wealthy broker who was sweeping the female protagonist off her feet, came to be. Is like, wait, who is that? I think it's very similar for the controls industry. Nobody wakes up wanting to be in the controls industry. I actually, you know, you said bread for controls. My father was an HVAC refrigeration technician. He died when I was very young, so I didn't really get to learn from him, but I felt like, I always had a set of gauges in the shop, and flare tools and all that stuff were always around. So like I had this weird sort of osmosis affiliation with refrigeration and HVAC. But I actually started my career in industrial automation. And I started pretty young, and um, worked in some very corporate environment initially. Actually, a large Fortune 200 company in a manufacturing facility, and maintained a bunch of heterogeneous, small machine systems that were all like part of the plant, but not like integrated. A lot like a bunch of, disparate HVAC systems across, 6 different wings in a hospital or something. And interestingly, I think part of what's drove my career in what we try to solve with ACE is a lot of that stuff was super vertically integrated, right? The solutions were, you had the PLC from vendor A, and you needed the historian from vendor A, and the HMI from vendor A, and it was always very frustrating. So when I got involved in more building automation, which was after a stint through IT, networking, infrastructure, did some IT networking commissioning in critical infrastructure environments. And then really, when we started ACE, I had worked with a large municipality, the city of Washington, D.C., to sort of tackle some of these vertically integrated challenges that they were having in their building portfolio. So I took a pretty roundabout route to it, but I love it. And I think I'm always intrigued by anything where I always explain industrial automation to people is like, anytime I can push a button here and something happens over there, that's like there's a little bit of excitement there. I don't know what that is, but yeah, I think I got here honestly.
Yeah, I think it's a really I think I really like the statement that you had there. Sometimes cross platforms aren't. Some things are vastly different, but some things aren't as different as people think. It's just because they don't know about that industry, about that industry. So like a lot of people who are in industrial automation don't really get into the true like HVAC control side. But if you actually peel back what it is, they're actually not that different after all, at least underneath.
Oh,
Um,
I mean, it's one of those things. Like I feel like everyone who's done any embedded development at all, and I do some of that more of a hobby than professionally, but um, it's all the same stuff.
yep.
so,
Yep.
so and I think that's there was a point in my career when I had a stint in there that I kind of skipped over in smart cities, which is a whole different types of control systems, right? Like intelligent traffic systems and management. Again, completely different vendors, completely different platforms, doing exactly the same thing. And so there was a point in my career where I was kind of winding up my time in smart cities. It didn't really feel like a good fit. And I was figuring out what I was going to do next. And I was kind of moping around like, oh my gosh, I've wasted my, entire life learning all these different industries. And I don't know, nothing's ever going to use all this experience. And then somehow, what we do at ACE, it seems to bring it all together. So, it's sometimes you just end up where you're supposed to be, I think.
So yeah, like so you kind of I was going to ask you about like a specific project, that kind of said, hey, we're doing this all wrong. You kind of already hit the nail with that question I had. So yeah, good. Some of my guests will actually answer questions before I can actually ask them. So um, That's always fun. So, um, what was the so when you moved from seeing the problems to building a company that's dedicated to solving them? What was the specific gap in the market that you saw and said Ace IoT needs to be this? So, was it like a frustration of existing hardware, or was it like a realization that the software layer was just completely missing the mark?
Yeah. Well, certainly we're not a hardware company. There's plenty of frustrations with the hardware, and I had this even when I was in the industrial space. I used to make the point that, like, we were spending lots of money for an industrial panel HMI, right? A user interface that goes in the front of a control cabinet that that gives the operator an interface to the machine. What we would think of as a BAS front end, but sort of more standalone and not normally networked the way BAS front ends have thankfully gotten to be standardized. I had this realization that, like, what it takes to survive the front of a panel in an industrial environment and what it takes to survive a diaper bag for a soccer mom aren't that different. And like these iPads that people were built that Apple was building for $300 or $400 were like really, really good hardware, way better than anything we had on the industrial side. But also way less expensive. And, sure, arguments could be made about the durability, but certainly very durable. And yet we were stuck with these HMIs that were, had processors from 20 years ago, screens from 15 years ago, and cost, more than my laptop. And also were limited to a single vendor's, graphics development environment that had all of its icons from 1984. So I think there's always been frustration with hardware, and it's been really rewarding in the BAS industry to start seeing some of that change. Certainly on the software side, I think when we started Ace, there was this, again, something that I had started to pay attention to in the industrial side. Really the applicability and need for time series databases, right? So when we think of things like how data management was thought of in the 80s or early 90s, when, say, BACnet, like just a trend log, right? Like a BACnet trend log, something we think of as ubiquitous, but laughable now that this linked list structure is going to be able to handle all of the data that we're ever going to need to know about a device that's running in a building, right? Like, it's, we have trend logs, they're great, but we always are scraping them out of the system and getting them into some long-term storage where we can really evaluate the performance of something over time and in finer granularity. The whole industrial world was the same way, right? We had these specialized historians with tags, and they were expensive, and you paid a license per point. And around the time we started Ace, there were the science of monitoring and operating large-scale IT systems was really coming into its own. And one of the first things that these really large IT organizations like Netflix and Amazon, one of the first things they really, and Google, one of the first things they realized was that they needed places to store really large amounts of time series data really cost effectively. And so they built those tools, and lucky for the rest of us, they open sourced a lot of them. So one of the things that I realized in the industrial world was, oh, wow, I can do so much like operational, efficiency metrics with these time series tools that are cheap or free and run on much less expensive hardware than these dedicated, Microsoft SQL servers that I had to run with an additional license from a industrial controls vendor's historian, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it was very similar, like inflection point with buildings. We were working with the city of Washington, D.C. They had 300 or 400 buildings in their portfolio, and they needed a lot more data. They had started with just getting all their metering data centralized, which is a big step, and a lot of organizations aren't even there yet. But they recognized that in order to decide where they wanted to put their capital, they were going to need a lot of operational data to help them differentiate between buildings where, maybe a sequence was, needed to be retro-commissioned and fixed, versus a building where the chiller really needs replaced. And those are two different cost structures with two different ROIs. And if you don't have some of this data that we now think of as being ubiquitous, it's really hard to make that decision intelligently. So that's probably the driving force for ACE IoT, was seeing this inflection point in the tools that were available for democratizing this data and making it available for folks who are really smart, but have been sort of starved on information for a long time in these industries.
So, speaking of data, we keep hearing that data is the new oil, and modern buildings are generating terabytes of this stuff. But in your view, why is the vast majority of that data sitting in this digital landfill? And why are we so bad at converting those raw points of data into actionable intelligence?
It's funny that this data is the new oil. That was being thrown around back 10 years ago when I was doing smart city stuff. And I used to retort, yeah, it's the new oil. It's dirty. It's messy. If you store it somewhere where you shouldn't, it leaks and gets all over everything and takes years to clean up. And so that analogy works a lot of different ways. I don't think you invited me here to be objective. So I'll give you my take, and then I'm sure you'll have other guests that will have their own takes. Right now, most of that data, I think we've done as I just laid out on the time series side, we've done a really good job of standardizing the raw time series. Like we can store terabytes of data, we can access it, we can run aggregations across it. What is still missing in a lot of systems is the context, right? And there's a lot of different ways to describe the context that you need to make use of some of this more unrefined data. I think that's the other oil analogy. Like this stuff really needs refined to get to something that's useful. I personally, and I think as a company, we sort of take on this opinion that semantic interoperability is a way that we can accomplish this data refinement that maintains independence between vendors. So what we've seen historically is that even with the advent and I would say dominance of BACnet, one of the ways that vendors have combated the openness of BACnet and trying to maintain some stickiness or moat around their customers has been storing the richest metadata outside of the BACnet data model. And there's plenty of technical reasons for that. BACnet was designed to provide really robust machine-to-machine communication, and it really wasn't engineered from the ground up to support the level of business intelligence metadata that we want now when we're talking about data analytics and such. But certainly I think it's used as an excuse as well. And so you end up with an open system that you've procured with open intention, that a significant part of the metadata, the rooms that the equipment's in, the rooms that a particular piece of equipment controls, the energy flow through the system, some or all of that may be available in your BAS front end, but it may be encoded in such a way that it's not interoperable. There's not a way to extract it easily and share it between applications. And I think semantic interoperability, and specifically, semantic standards like BRIC, ASHRAE 223, and I think Haystack is kind of getting there with the semantic side of things. Those data models give you the additional metadata you need to really refine and drive insight out of that raw. Some say oil, some say sewage. It just depends on your perspective, I guess. As a data plumber, I'm more inclined to think of it as sewage, I think.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So, you have these like you've got like there's definitely a process failure here somewhere. So like, you have IT teams that understand code and the cloud, and you've got other teams that like understand chillers and valves. So I guess a question I have is do you see a disconnect, and where is that disconnect happening? And, is it like a language barrier between these two groups that's causing the data strategies to fail? Or is it, maybe, is it technology that's having a compatibility issue?
It's all of the above, right? I think I lined out some of the technology problems where the metadata you need to derive intelligence and insight from the raw data just isn't available in a way that's easily extractable. That's a technology challenge, and we can address those. There's definitely people challenges involved as well, and some of that is definitely language barriers. Some of it is even in the systems. I mentioned like we have this intention of procuring open systems, but we're not always successful at that. And I think some of that is down to language barrier. We're asking folks who have dedicated a significant portion of their lives to becoming deep subject matter experts on physics and energy flow, who can, size a chiller, perfectly, and, understand how all the energy flows through a chilled water system, or gets the ventilation just right on a DOAS, or like they have their subject matter expertise, and networks and communications don't typically, they aren't typically one of their subjects of expertise. And so the integration of the expertise you need on the technology side, on the communications and network infrastructure technology, a lot of times it's left either up to chance, or as some of these standards like to say, like a local concern. And that would be a good podcast title too: a controls problem or a local concern.
Yes.
But
Yes.
a local matter. Or the other one that people would probably resonate with, authority having jurisdiction.
Yep.
these these terms we have where we just pass off we abdicate all responsibility. So I think that sometimes that is the gap, is that folks put something in a spec that sounds right, but no one is involved in the project delivery process that understands all the moving pieces that have to be aligned in order to actually deliver that. And then once the project's delivered, there's no incentive for anyone to go back and validate that actually happened, or that the outcome that was defined, the intent of the outcome, not the letter, but the intent, was actually accomplished. And so I think that's something as an industry we're going to have to get better at. We're going to have to develop more expertise, or the business models that allow bringing in the right expertise when necessary. And that's part of what we've sort of recognized a gap and started trying to step up to bat for our clients that need help with that, is that a lot of times there's no one involved in the project to even give like a go, no go, gauge on where things are at. And so being able just to have the expertise to say, no, this isn't right yet. You need to do this and this and this. And, this network needs to be a little more robustly architected in order to support the use cases you have in mind for your building. A lot of organizations just don't have that capacity.
So, who do you think is currently responsible for data integrity?
Whew. That's a spicy one, right? I mean, I think the honest answer is no one. I would say there's very few entities issuing construction documents that clearly delineate this. So if no one is defined, then no one is. More optimistically, like who should be responsible? Ultimately the owner of the individual system delivery is probably who's responsible, but it can't be left up to them to validate it. Just in the same way that commissioning, now we think of commissioning as a standard practice, we have to have commissioning of the data as a standard practice as well. So it's unheard of, or you wouldn't imagine deploying millions of dollars in central plant infrastructure and then just taking the word of whoever installed it that it was correct and doing what the intent was. You would hire a commissioning firm. And I think that to get where we need to go with this industry, it's going to have to fall in the commissioning scope to validate some of these things. Unfortunately, the commissioning industry has a gap here as well, just like the specifying engineers have a gap. So it's going to take some work to build the capacity, and it's going to start with people putting it in the spec and then having organizations go figure out how they're going to respond to that spec.
Yeah, so I think that what I agree overall with what you're saying. Like, the owner needs to kind of talk to everyone and say, hey, look, this is what I'm looking for, and this is what I kind of need, and then have the experts come in and then help facilitate this process. When I'm training people and I'm talking about at least tagging at the very basic level, and right now we're just talking about, I normally just teach about haystack. We don't talk about brick schema yet because that's a whole other thing that people would try to get into. But I find that a lot of people, after like even leaving my the training, a lot of them just don't tag at all. Um, and so, I guess a question I have is like, you see like a bunch of companies, they budget, they have these massive spending budgets on analytics, like, Sky Foundry and a couple others that, they have these overlays and dashboards. And effectively, some of these tools that just no one logs into after a while. So, like, I guess a question that I have is, why would you think that this keeps happening? Like, do you think the tools are too complex, or like, do we not have enough ways to make smart tagging easier for vendors and contractors?
Well, I can't take credit for my answer here. I think it's, Stephen Dawson Haggerty at Normal. He made this point, and it really stuck with me, that I'm an optimist. I am always looking at the, what aspirationally what we could do as an industry. I wouldn't dare try to define whether Stephen is or is not an optimist, but he does tend to have a little more skepticism around the rate of change. And his point that I think is very, very valid is that none of this stuff really gets adoption until it's integrated into the project delivery workflow. So if you're training people and you're telling them that they need to tag, and then you're turning them over to the graphics development and it's not making their job easier developing the graphics,
Yeah.
then they're not going to do it. But if the only way to build graphics is tagging, then it gets done. And I think that's the reality, is that once the realization is there and people start building the tools to take advantage of the data models, right now it's a chicken and egg problem, right? Why would I build something to take advantage of a data model that's not there? But I think people are buying into the vision of what's possible. So I remain hopeful, but I think it does come down to that, is if the way to do your job, which is, you're probably, if you're smaller tier controls contractor, not, having a commissioning agent because you're working on smaller projects, that sort of thing, like your ultimate gate is your client looking over your shoulder and saying, oh yeah, those graphics look good. So that's all you really care about. So if you can get the tagging process integrated into the best workflow for delivering that, that's how it's going to get disseminated.
Yeah, like, there's J2Fin, right? That's one great way for tag-based graphics. We don't really talk a whole lot about tag-based graphics in Niagara. I do, and I have a couple videos on it too, because I think that a lot of people uh, should use them more. Uh, Especially when you have systems that you want to have uniformity across the system for graphic, but they may not have the same point name. So like I may say supply air temp, you may say SAT. Matthew, because he likes to be called Matthew, may spell it supply air temperature. And so then like to have three separate graphics, to display the same thing, yeah, if you just implement a tag and bring it into the system, it
But
should work and read it.
but it's so much more powerful than that, right? Because not only are we talking about the point tags themselves, but we're talking about tagging out the structure of the system. And especially if we're talking about ontology like brick, then your graphics can be 100% driven, right? Like you
Yep.
can generate, and I think you did a video recently where you did this, but you had to do it outside of the tools that are built into
Yes.
Niagara. And
Yep.
that is damning, right? Like here is one of the most prolific platforms in the industry that should be supporting some of these like really what should become standard and should be the workflows people are using, and you're having to work around limitations in the platform. And I think that's like the challenge I'm highlighting, is these
Yeah.
platforms need to adopt this stuff as native. Like this should be the way to do it. Like your nav tree should be based on your equipment model in your tagging or ontology, because it's the same thing. It's just that you're building it, one step at a time in a procedural way. Whereas ideally you have the data model and you're not having to maintain it. You add a piece of equipment, you tag it, it shows up. And it's got it knows it's a VAV and it knows it has reheat and the graphics load appropriately and all the points are there because they're tagged, etc. We're not there yet.
Right.
Very few platforms. I think you mentioned J2. Like that's probably one of, if not the only one I'm aware of that really takes it from the top like that.
Correct. And for the record, I agree. Like, I will say sometimes development is hard, especially when you start to like when you want to start to support something, and then you already have you already have some of the stuff already done, and then it's like, how long does it take to get that stuff implemented? So I do think that sometimes from a development standpoint that you need to be more forward thinking. Especially if you know if something is coming down the line, then you should have support for it immediately once you're ready to implement. I agree with that. I think that there does need to be a little more proactivity among the vendors to help with this, especially because we all know about digital twins and stuff like that. And that's becoming more important to people. So it does seem that vendors are behind the times in that respect. And you're right. I did create something that, outside the framework, I had to do it that way because currently it doesn't exist. And yeah, it should exist. And I think that, you don't, you have very few people that know like how to access stuff like that outside the framework, which is why I've been trying to do as much to educate people. Like, hey,
Yeah, well, I
like,
think it's great
yeah,
for
thank you.
sure.
You
Because
have to do it.
I think there's a challenge here where I think I'm guilty of this. Like, I can talk about brick and ontologies and semantic interoperability, and I know, like, I'm excited about it. I have a vision in my head of how all this can work. I am not communicating that vision very well. So the fact that you're showing people what's possible is so effective and so important, because I think right now most people just glaze over. Like, they're glaze when you talk about tagging and you're training people how to tag and it doesn't connect because none of the tools they use on a daily basis really utilize that tagging. Of course they're going to glaze over and forget about it as soon as they get back to their office. But when you show them, hey, here's a whole floor's worth of VAVs, and I only did one of them. Like, that's a big deal.
Yep.
So I think it's really important that you're helping communicate that. I would ask you, if I'm allowed to ask a question back.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do we as the industry drive these vendors to provide these better tools? Like, I don't think many people are in your shoes to be able to do the work to demonstrate what they should be doing.
Right.
But what do they need to specify things differently? What can they do? What can folks do to help drive this?
So I do think that some of it is demand from the, from the greater collective. It helps, for me being, in the vendor world, it helps me only being out of the building industry for, a very short period of time, and also maintaining relationships with students that are going to be continually doing this well after I'm, you know, well after I'm, I've been teaching for 20 years or whatnot. So, it has to be, sometimes it has to come from them, but at the same time, we need to be pioneers. And the fact is, they may not even know that they need this, right? And the fact is, if we give it to them, then they're like, hey, that's something we've actually needed the whole time. And that's what I've been trying to do. And also, kind of the pushback from vendors at times is, um, some vendors may determine, like, yeah, I don't know if it's worth, investing some time into those kind of tools. Whereas I think that a lot of the stuff I'm doing is great, and in some cases where, it's like, hey, we're not sure if we're gonna do it. Okay, well, I'm just gonna make it free. I'm just gonna go ahead. If people want to build their own, I'm gonna give them the tools to do it. They can go to GitHub and they can just go ahead and do it. And I usually have a video on it anyway. Um, so I think that, it comes from both sides. And I think that vendors now need to, finally understand, like, hey, as we, put our, fingers on the pulse of what is happening, we now need to understand that we may need to provide a few, more tools for the customer than they are usually, they're not used to getting. And so if eventually now they're starting to see these tools more and more, I then think controls, contractors will start using them. And whether this is Tritium, whether this is automated logic, whether this is train or reliable controls, doesn't matter here. Um, the more tools that vendors just put out, then understanding, hey, from the customer, what are you, out of these tools that we're using, which ones are you finding the most useful? And then continuing to build on that. So I do think that development does need to come from the OEM, initially, and then, reach maintaining that relationship with those partners that are continuing, to use those products along the way. That was a great question. And hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think the audience that I face a lot of times are, sophisticated portfolio owners who are frustrated. I sat down with one, I guess, a little over a year ago. And his whole position was like, we looked at all this stuff. We looked at analytics. We looked at all these platforms, I don't know, 3 years ago. Convince me that anything has changed since then.
Right.
And that
that's
was a
hard.
challenging conversation. So that's what I think I'm at. Like, these people are wanting to lead, they're wanting, but they don't see their, the service providers that they're able to access. They don't know how to influence them, and they're not seeing exciting technologies coming through that, through that path. And I guess, like, some of them ask me, like, well, what can we do to drive the change we want to see? And, I think on this problem we started with, where we're talking about, the gap between the digital infrastructure and the physical infrastructure, I think that a lot of that change can be driven by, what you put in your owner's project requirements, and, how you write your Division 25 specs and all that stuff. This is a little bit more sticky, I think, because it is such a chicken and egg thing. How do you specify something that no OEM provides yet? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tough road. It's sometimes it's hard for it to gain traction in in the OEM, in the office at times, where like you know someone has the idea, and you have a lot of people who work for OEM, a lot of people who work for OEMs that have been so far removed out of the industry, if they even work for the industry at all. And so
Right.
sometimes it's hard for them to grasp the concept of why someone would want to do it versus, versus something that we need to do. So, for LinkedIn, I think that's why I've been showing a lot of stuff here. I'm like, because I think that a lot of people need some of this stuff. And if people don't necessarily want to take the time to, spend the time in development to release it as their own, I don't mind giving it out for free. So that way people can then take what they need, take what they like, and then, um, and then move forward with it, which is why I just put out that developer series too. Like, hey, you can create some of this stuff here. I'm going to give you the building blocks and the fundamentals to do some of this stuff on your own and explore it beyond what beyond what people originally thought they could do. Like, I actually want to do something with tagging where, like, after you've put all the, after you've built the system, you've added the devices, you've added the points, I want to do something where I just run a button and it just goes and tags all the points. And then I do want to have a scenario where, like, maybe they, with adding just a couple additional features, yeah, actually kind of having like J2 Fin, and it actually like build the graphic, like even like an air handler, like, oh, does it, do you have a supply air temp and a return air temp? Do you have an exhaust damper? So if it sees that, you have like those things, okay, cool. Well, guess what? Now it builds like like a sideways H, or an eye duct, something like that, and putting everything in its place. So I think that, if we can move forward in that kind of thing to not only increase productivity, but making sure that the things that are being created are better for the data that we're getting, that provide that value, I think is, well, really invaluable at that point. Then you can't really put money on it, and the amount of time that you take to invest it, well, we should invest the time, because we know that this is actually going to be a home run.
Yeah, I think anything you can do to help demonstrate that value to the folks on the ground who are, having, I remember very, 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 very viscerally the first time I sat down with a controls contractor as a commissioning agent. And I won't name the controls platform because I think they all have idiosyncrasies that make them somewhat awful to use, honestly, as a more traditional software developer. But I remember just being abhorrent at what he had to do in order to make it work. And this was a vendor who's like text programming language like only supported single letter variables in the like equations and stuff. And
Oh,
so he would have this whole like block at the top of the file of comments of like A is actually supply air temp, B is that, and I was just like, this is the stuff computers are great at solving. Why are they making the human do it? It didn't make any sense. And so I think that we just need, this whole industry needs a little bit of that perspective of, let the computers do the dirty work. Humans should be doing the stuff that requires a little thought and, defining what the intent of the system should be, what the right outcome is, all of that stuff. Let the computers figure out this messy, annoying part that, we all spend hours and hours on.
yeah, I know what you're talking about. So we'll make sure we gloss over that, and people can do a little research on that to find out. But I like as soon as I was like, oh yeah, I remember that one. Um,
Well,
yeah,
they're
I was like,
still
oh,
around, so I hope they've changed things, but who knows?
not really, not really,
Okay.
not that portion. That is still a thing that they do. You're not wrong. When we were talking about, we've talked about tagging and brick and haystack and standardization. Um, let's for the people who are not, for the non-technical listeners that we have now, and there are some, even business leaders that we have listening. Can you explain why adopting a standard data model is the difference between a smart building and a connected building?
Oh, interesting. I've not heard that as a like a gating factor, but I like it. I like it. Um, so I I'll interpret what you're saying a little bit, and that like that a connected building is a building where somebody can get the data and it's there somewhere, and if you call the people who installed everything, they can see the data and they can maybe give you some value and help you run your building better. And that there's this gating factor on a standardized data model. The real beauty of it is that you can drag and drop applications into your building the same way we deploy applications on phones and all that. And when I say an application, I don't mean, a better solitaire on your phone. We're talking about, demand response or, smart EV charging where you're, doing peak load management with your EV charging. All these things that if you have a building 5 or 10 years old, probably wasn't baked into it from the start. And the conventional way of deploying those technologies would be a custom integration, right? So you would go to a smart EV charging vendor and you would procure their platform, and then you would get the master systems integrator or potentially their technology folks to implement it in your building, and they would have to just find all of the demand points on the chillers and the VFDs on the fans and pumps and the net meter at the building, and then they would decide that a when the building load is above a certain level, they'll curtail EV charging. And then the next month you say, that was great, let's do demand response, and you go find a whole nother vendor. They come in, they do another set of integrations. By the way, they're all deploying their own widgets in this building. Now your chiller, which has the same processor as your Casio watch from 1985, I think, is getting hammered on the network. Everybody's asking it, how much energy you use? How much energy are you using? How much energy are you using? It's freaking out. It can't keep, it crashes and loses control of the PID loop or whatever. And meanwhile, you're paying for all this integration at least twice, and that's just those two applications. The next thing you want to do is, demand control ventilation that wasn't part of your original control sequence, and you bring that platform in. Each of those integrations, completely custom, throw away if you want to change vendors. You don't like smart EV charger number 1 and you decide you want to try the smart EV charger platform 2. Guess what? Custom integration, somebody has to come out, redoes it all. The standardized data model means that those applications, EV charging with demand limiting, peak demand limiting just for utility optimization, demand response for energy market participation, all of those can consume the information from your building in a way they understand it, because it looks the same as every other building. Even though the individual systems in your building are still the snowflake that they are, the data model can be standardized in such a way that these applications can discover what they need to run in your building without custom integration. And it's just a future-proofing step, really, and reduces the cost of all of the iterative applications you deploy post-construction.
Yeah, you answered that one pretty well. You knocked that one out of the park. Trying to think of some more questions here.
I doubt you've ever had to deal with a chiller that got knocked offline by communications, right? Like that's never happened before.
Well, I am a firm believer of hardwiring everything and using only communication as information only. Um, Now, there are a lot of people that go against that grain and want to use communication just 2 wires for everything or a Cat5 cable. And
Well,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, my background in critical infrastructure and industrial systems, industrial and critical infrastructure are well down the path of using communications for things, critical systems. But they do it in a smart way. They understand that communications path is critical. Once you have a critical signal, a life safety signal traveling over a communications path, that entire network is a life safety system. And I do not get the impression that the building automation industry has a similar approach. So, if you're going to rely on communication for integration, you need to know what your network's doing. You need to have managed switches where you can see how traffic is flowing in your network, where you can isolate bad behavior. You might need redundant Ethernet interfaces with failover and media redundancy protocol. Like all these things are the tools that you can use to make technology communication-based systems as robust and resilient, or maybe more so than the hardwired equivalent. But you can't do it with just, the cheapest switch you found at Office Depot on your way to the job site, which is what we find in buildings generally. So it's a bit of there's a way to do it, but it doesn't seem to be the way that it's done.
Yeah. No, I agree. I used to when I dealt with a lot of Network 8000, and really when we were just getting into JACEs, we were still doing a lot of GCMs or LNCs and stuff. And someone's like, "Well, hey, Tritium can integrate this chiller. Can you?" I was like, "Yeah, just put a relay on it. I've integrated to it. I can turn it on and off. Like, I don't know. I don't know what else like you're talking about. Like, you know, 20 years ago, and even 20 years ago, like people were like, "Oh yeah, everything is just going to be 2 wires eventually, and no one's going to have any control systems at all without communication like that." And I'm like, "Well, we still have controls that we're still turning things on and off, from a relay or an analog signal." Um, so yeah, put that in your pipe and smoke it. Um, it really is one of those wild things where, some predictions get made like MQTT is the way of communicating now, and that's going to be the new backnet, whatever. And I'm like, no, not really. It not at least from
That
from
one
our perspective.
that one was a interesting one for me because on its face it sounds great, and I
Right.
would say the same thing for REST, right? This the the building automation technology industry or the smart buildings technology industry, not really the controls folks, but all those applications. They love to tell you about why don't we just use REST APIs instead of
Right.
BACnet? And when you finally realize how brittle REST integrations are, and that's if you have a real REST integration,
Yep.
and that there's no real interoperability there unless we start defining application data standards. You can do it if you're adopting something like Brick, and then you have, an RDF endpoint or Haystack endpoint. Like that's where you have the application data as part of the communication standard. But saying REST is not the same thing. And then when you start digging into what people call REST, and you find out like these aren't REST APIs, these are
Right.
RPC APIs, these are using HTTP, but that's it. That's the only thing they have in common with REST. It just becomes like these nightmare end to end to end to end integration scenarios where every project you're doing, basically a custom integration because yeah, you're using the same software platform, but guess what? The version changed since the last time you deployed it and the API updated and now, those models aren't available. And so that one was always hard. And then MQT is the same thing. Like you can run Sparkplug B, which is sort of like a backnet that the industrial world has adopted. It's not quite as standardized. It's not quite as interoperable as BACnet, but at least provides like the framing for the data in an interoperable way. But otherwise, MQTT is like an open, like it might as well be like open a serial port and that's your standard. Like, yeah, you can open the serial port, but somebody puts an extra line break in there and your application breaks. So
Yes.
same thing with MQTT. So yeah, it was fascinating when that was like everything's going to be MQTT, and maybe it will be, but it will be after we've defined some more robust interoperability standards to run on top of the core technology.
Yeah, like you've got a lot of before we get more more about smart building stuff. Home was it Home Assistant? Is that what it's called?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like so a lot of people are really kind of getting into that, and so that's where a lot of the MQ, like I do see a lot of MQTT now, where like a lot of people are using Home Assistant.io, and then they're using Node-RED, and then they're
But
kind of
but look
passing
at
them.
how that works. They're using it in a single environment where the application data protocol for Home Assistant's pretty well defined.
Yep.
And that's great. But when some OEM outsources their development and says, I need a MQTT interface, and the outsourced development entity knows nothing about the industry
Yep.
or protocols and they just invent their own, then that's not the same thing. And you end up with, messages with all kinds of formats. You have to have your broker understand, and your application has to be able to interpret different streams different ways, and it just becomes a nightmare.
Yep.
But yeah, Home Assistant's great because it's all one integrated environment and it's pretty well defined. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of fun. When I was doing the Node-RED MQTT video series, I added some additional things in my JSON strings, and that a lot of people aren't used to seeing, and so it actually became more of a happy accident because I'm like, oh yeah, I can just do it this way and keep it, and then like as I brought it into like Niagara, I was like, oh yeah, I can't just parse that as an actual value. Now I need to create a program object, which I'm like, oh, cool. Now I can show people that hey, if you get some of this, now you can do this to fix it too. Um, so like some of that for me when I was getting a little creative, I'm like, I got too creative on that one. But you're right. Like you do find that you have developers that have no business developing the product. Um, I when I so there was a developers course I took, and it was for Tritium, and um, most of the people in there had no trading experience whatsoever, had not even opened up Niagara. Um, and that blew my mind. I was like, you're going to develop for something that you've never even touched before. Okay. Wild. And, and one of the questions that like one of the developers asked, because the developer trainer, great guy, very sharp, not from the BAS industry, but came in and has really absorbed everything like a sponge. He talks to a lot of people in the BAS industry to help him better understand how things work and then get a new perspective. So when he develops something, like he's got like the BAS mind in there to do it, which has been really good. But like he was talking about like histories and doing something different. And the guy's like, how do you add a trend log? And my mouth dropped. And like he kind of like and he looked at me like, hey, can you lift your chin up for a second before they turn around and see your slack jawed gaze? Um and I was like, why why are we doing this to ourselves? Like we're these people are going out in the world and they're just going to build something that may not have any value whatsoever, or that they don't have that particular background. So it really is tough. Like I feel like people who want to be in this industry, you can have a great a developer's mind, but you really need to have a good fundamental understanding of how BAS systems work and what people are doing in the field ahead of time, that now you can come up with a better implementation, which now actually brings me up to my next point now. Things about the C-suite. So, maybe for the people who don't know what that is, like maybe could you explain what the C-suite is and how do we better align goals with that with the realities of the facility team? And more importantly, at that part after that, how do you prove to like a CFO that investing in a better data structure isn't just an IT cost, but a driver for sustainability
Mm,
and better outcomes that the business is demanding?
yeah. Well, I'm not. First of all, let me quickly qualify. I don't know that I'm the best person to answer this question because I think if I knew how to communicate with the C-suite more effectively, I'd have enough money. I wouldn't be wasting time on this podcast. But, but
Okay.
that's no, it's tough, right? This whole industry, I make the joke every day that like we're in a bad business. So starting from there, so the C-suite, these are the people at the top of the organization who are making strategic decisions, right? The
Yep.
chief operations officer, chief financial officer, chief executive officer. A lot of this stuff never makes it to the CEO level. It's the COO and the CFO arguing about whether to spend money now or later. That's generally kind of the C-suite experience with facilities. And facilities proper doesn't generally have a seat at the table, even in the C-suite, right? Like they're
Yep.
being filtered. There's a VP of facilities who's answering to the COO or the CFO, and it's being very filtered. It's a challenge for the whole industry. I think thankfully the last few years that the regulatory environment has driven more interest in sustainability writ large across the C-suite, which then comes into like if you're going to have a sustainable building, it has to be a building you can control. Like you can't get sustainable without control. And solving some of these fundamental issues that in the past maybe we just didn't have the coverage. So I think that's one path. The regulatory environment is dynamic and seems like you never know month to month which how it's flowing. But that's certainly something we've seen for us, and especially on this data standardization stuff. Like you really have to translate it into KPIs they care about, right? So
Yep.
timing is a big one. How long these projects take, de-risking projects. We've been doing a lot of work on network health and network quality. And that really comes down to like if you're convincing a CFO that they're going to spend millions of dollars in their capital project, capital budget to take on some project in a building, and you can't give any sense of whether the communication infrastructure in that building will support that new application. It's a hope and a prayer, and if it doesn't, we'll have to figure it out. Like, that's not a good position to be in. So a lot of those C-suite folks are always thinking about risk mitigation. And so that's the language that we've started using when we talk about network health is you want to implement advanced supervisory control. You want demand control ventilation. You want, 330, 300 rule, right? You want your comfort is paramount for your your workforce. When you go to deploy those technologies, understanding, having robust data models, understanding network architectures, those are the things that can give you confidence that that money you spend is actually going to deliver the outcome you're interested in. And you really do have to tie it back to what their priorities are. So some of them, it may simply be, hey, we need to reduce our scope 1 emissions carbon reporting stuff for SEC or EU regulation or whatever, right? So you can't get good reset strategies running on a control system that's so old that they fall over when you try to apply those sequence of operations. So that's a good justification for why the control system needs an upgrade. Same thing for comfort scores and air quality, CO2, demand control ventilation for CO2 management, all of that stuff. So like those kinds of levers are what you have to really learn how to tell the story. Like no executive is going to get excited when you tell them that this new VAV controller has 2 Ethernet ports, right? Like they have no idea what you're talking about. They don't know what a VAV is. They don't know what a VAV controller is, and they're not real sure what Ethernet is, but they think they've heard of it. So
Yes.
that level of like translation is really where we have to get to, and it's tough. It's tough, and what I find is most effective, which again, I'm not an expert at this at all, but what I've found is most effective is understanding what their priorities are before you try to tell them how you address them, right? When you go in, you're like playing a guessing game, that's rough. But if you can get them to open up and talk about what they're trying to accomplish as an organization and align what you're proposing to those goals, that tends to be, a more effective strategy. If you've got input on this, I'd love to hear it because,
I think you're right. Like it's you have to speak their language, right? One of the things that obviously like a CFO, what's a CFO going to look at? Money, right? So like at that point, if you understand
money and risk.
yes,
Money today and potential money tomorrow are the two
yep,
things they understand.
yep, and then like like if you and if you go to like the CTO, right? Like they have to understand that uh, they need to understand the short and long term needs to that use the capital to make those investments to help the organization. Like you're right. I don't know if I can add much more to what you said because I think you and I are in pretty much perfect alignment on uh,
Well, I
uh,
just am hoping someone has the secret, right? Like I'm waiting
yeah.
for someone to say, "Well, let me clue you in. Here's what you do. You say these 4 words." I've been
Yes.
waiting on that for a long time. Here's the handshake, and nobody's given it to me yet. So I figure this
No.
is as good an opportunity to ask for it as any.
I tell you, I am not good with politics at all. And Matthew knows I speak my mind, and I tend to upset a lot of people. Like I feel like at times I'm like Tony Soprano, and I don't know how much of the Sopranos that you know or whether people know about it, but there's an episode where the old mafia boss Jackie Aprile, his son Jackie Jr., he was getting in some trouble, and their uncle, Tony Soprano, clipped. Well, actually, his Tony Soprano's sister Janice clipped him, and Tony got rid of the body. But like, Jackie Jr. was messing up quite a bit. So Tony Soprano with the best supporting actor ever, his fork, um, like as he was sitting there eating, trying to eat dinner, he's like, I'm going to say some things and I'm going to say some bad words. Like that's usually like when people ask me about something, I'm like, yeah, I'm not really the best person to give you the most political answer. And I feel like that's where I would need to use AI to like, hey, can you help me corporate this because I can't corporate very well. So for me, like if I'm talking to someone like that, yeah, time and money, those are a big thing. Risk is also a great one too. To really kind of like, well, hey, there's no risk to you if you invest in this, and even if it got screwed up, there's very little money that was actually involved in that. We're like, okay, well, why are we not doing that already? How come you haven't done that yet? So yeah, you're right. Like if you can cater to what each individual C of that C-suite does, I think then collectively they can come up with a better solution. But yeah, I wish I had the gift of gab when it comes to that. I just drink and know things. That's really that's really it for me. And I can't necessarily. I am not a whisperer of that unless if it comes to Niagara. I'm a fairly pretty good Niagara whisperer, but most other things I'm not. That now making video games for the Niagara Freight
Well,
also.
maybe. Yeah. By the way, like I meant no offense towards your podcast by that comment. And if it
Oh, not at
feels a
all.
little too edgy, by all means cut it out. But I just mean in general, like
Nah, no, we don't care. Yeah.
We're not
I wouldn't
cutting that
touch
out. No.
I wouldn't touch a building with a 10-foot pole if I knew how to sell stuff to executives.
Oh no, I no for the record, I didn't take offense to it all. You were like, if I had more money than what I'm making now, yeah, I wouldn't be on here. Like, okay, fair.
I
That's more than a fair
absolutely
statement.
agreed.
Like that would
I think
be, that
that's
would be
probably true for all of us. If we knew how to sell to executives effectively, we'd have done our thing and moved on. We'd be fishing right now or something, you know.
I actually don't know about me. Matthew knows I'm a psychopath when it comes to this stuff. So when I
Yeah,
tell
he'd
people,
probably still be doing it.
Well,
yeah,
you're
like
bred for it. You were bred for it. What
well,
can you
literally,
help it?
no, well, literally, I was. My dad's actually part owner of a company in DC. So he's done controls his whole life, and then he wanted me when I was a young warthog to get into it. So at the age of 10, I started learning controls, at a very molecular level. So yeah, this is controls are what I know. Like Matthew McConaughey, I was driving a Lincoln before they paid me to drive a Lincoln. Like I was doing controls before they paid me to do them. So, but yeah, no offense, no offense at all that. You know, we've talked about digital twins and AI a little bit. So, your take, if we strip away the marketing fluff
Mm.
from those two, what is a practical step that a building owner should take, let's say tomorrow morning, to make their data useful with them?
I think the practical step is demanding that the applications that they buy adhere to some data standard that means that the work they do to get value out of those applications is transferable to the next application they want to deploy. That's true for controls, that's true for analytics, that's true for a digital twin platform. Anything they're doing with their building, they should, like, as an industry, and this is our worst habit, that we throw away so much information at every stage of a building's life cycle. But as an industry, we need to be able to collect value over time versus treating it as like, okay, we did all this design work, we built the building, and then all the design intent gets thrown away, and 5 years from now, the building will be performing terrible, and I'll hire somebody to come in and do a retro commission, and they'll have to figure out the design intent from zero. So what we can do to, get data models out of even the designs themselves, right? If you've got a BIM model that has all your equipment documented in it, like getting all that in a way that can be transferred to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, that is the biggest that's the biggest step you can take, is just making sure you're not throwing away value.
Yeah, that's a really really good point. I like your perspective on that for sure. Last question I have, and maybe a follow up one, but one's more of a fun question I like to ask people. Um, let's say let's say we took 5 years down the road and we actually get this data layer right. What does that unlock for us besides energy savings? What does the quote unquote, let's say, solved version of the industry look like for you?
So, energy savings, I think, is the most important thing, right? We have, in two different ways. So, one is energy savings in large scale facilities where the facilities teams are overworked already and they don't have time to do everything and they don't have the budgets to hire external, all the things we know, right? That's all. Yeah. Getting the data model right, getting the data layer right means the cost to deploy these solutions goes down astronomically. And what that does, not for these top tier buildings, for the rest of the industry, for the rest of the market, the buildings that don't even have BASs right now, it enables us to deploy the same top tier control strategies, top tier sequence of operations that we would put in a Class A office building in downtown San Francisco. It allows us to get that in the middle school in rural Idaho. And that is what the outcome that I think we end up with in 5 years, if we do things right, is that we're democratizing access to this stuff so that we're not just saving money and saving energy in the top tier buildings. We're driving that down to where everybody is getting, better air quality, better energy performance, lower energy bills because they're grid responsive, all that stuff. That's what I think we're working towards. Now, I might be a little bit of a pessimist that 5 years is enough time, but
Right.
aside from that, I think that's really what, like, the reason why I'm such a stickler on these data models and pushing for semantic interoperability. It's absolutely because I think it's the only way we get this stuff pushed down market.
Yeah. No, you're right. It is. You have to. Sometimes you have to be the bad guy in the whole thing, and you're not the bad guy. It's more of like, hey, this is what we need to do, and I'm holding you accountable for this because if you don't, someone has to. And if we're not holding accountability for people, what are we doing? Like we're all the efforts that we're going to be doing is just wasteful at that point. So I think that 5 years probably isn't realistic. 20 to 25 probably. You know,
Unfortunately,
yeah,
I
like
I would like to think that we can make a dent in it in the next 5, and that in 10 years it'll look really different. That would be my optimistic perspective, is that in 5 years we'll understand a little better how we're going to get there, and in 10 years we'll have really transformed some portions of this. But that's where I'm at. It's, and I don't know, like, holding people accountable. I don't know that no one's listening to me enough for that, and I don't know that I'm saying any of the right things. I think I'm not super like, I sound super opinionated because I say things, but I can be influenced. What is not influencing to me is keep doing things the same way, and I hear
right.
a lot of that in this industry.
Mhm.
That does not do anything for me.
Yeah.
You're never gonna win me over with, well, let's just keep doing it the same way and maybe it'll be different next year. I think we need to try some different things. The stuff that I have gotten behind is what I want to try and I'm working on, implementing into our process and workflows. But if somebody's doing something different and new, I'm behind them. I just think this, like, risk averse status quo approach it's just not going to get us where we need to go fast enough.
Yep. You're 100% right on that. You know, how often do we hear that's the way we've always done it, right? Like, like you hear it time and time again. Well, that's the way we've always done it. Why do we need to change? Because you have to, right? You have to change. Like it is a big thing that's really important to keep it going forward.
Yeah, and I mean I think that's one of the beauty. Like, there's a lot of things to talk about. AI's ability to generate propaganda that's indistinguishable from real life and bots and all. Like, we can talk about all the negation of AI, the negatives of AI. But I do think one of the things that it's doing right now is it's convincing a bunch of people and a bunch of businesses that they can't just keep doing the same thing. And that, I think, is a win. May take a little while for the dust to settle for it to really show up as a win. And it may not look like all the prognostication that AI is going to do it all for us. That may not be the reality. But the fact that it's driving action of any kind, I think, is a win.
Agreed, 100%. Last question I have, and this is just a thing that I ask most people. Out of the control systems that you've encountered, which one do you prefer?
Oh boy. So I'm not a controls guy, right? So my experience with them is mostly around trying to extract meaningful, useful data and
Sure.
finding reliable infrastructure. And for that, I think this may be a hot take, but I think ALC is up there for me. They expose their data model in a way that it's very easily extractable. You can get most of the insight about the building that is required to build the graphics from an easily exportable points and device list. And it seems to be pretty reliable. There's some weird technologies there, like ArcNet is odd, but fairly robust. I think, what has me maybe less inclined to jump on like the Tritium train with everyone else is that you never know what you're going to get in a Tritium system because it's so flexible. Whereas I feel like the ALC is not nearly as flexible, but I kind of know what I'm getting into when I see one. Whereas with Tritium, it's so dependent on the integrator,
Yes.
how it's implemented. And it's always sort of like, until I get under the hood, I don't know what I'm going to find.
Yeah, no, and that's valid, right? Like web control is a solid system, and from a graphics perspective, most ALC integrators, um, eh, the reason one of the reasons why the cost of their controllers are expensive is actually one of the most expensive products on the market. Is actually their graphics all go to Kennesaw, Georgia, and get made in house there. You can make your own, but very few of them actually do. So yeah, you have the same look and feel of an ALC product. So like when you get in front of web control, it looks the same regardless of who's done it. And so that
And
consistency.
that look is a little long in the tooth. Let's be clear, but it is consistent.
Yeah, and I do tell people all the time when I'm teaching that a positive and a negative, because it is both, from Tritium, is that it is a blank slate.
Yeah.
It is great in the fact that there's nothing canned, quote unquote, in the fact of like, it has to be done this way. You can tailor to what you want. But the problem with that is then you have to build it. And then there are some people who are like, well, why can't it just be built? And I'm like, well, fair point. But in some cases, then that's when I argue about standards and holding, people higher. Like, hey, that's why companies need to have standards in place, because this is, once you've got the rough edges, once you've got the rough edges smoothed out, it can work out really, really, really well. But it
Yeah,
can take a while.
and let's be very clear. I'm not judging any of these systems on their user interface, because I think
Yeah.
pretty much all user interfaces in the BAS world are awful compared to modern software. So I'm just writing that off as a concern. I'm concerned about it from the data modeling perspective, what I have to deal with on the integration side. But yeah, it's funny. Like, I don't even think about the UI anymore. Yeah.
Well, no, good. I mean, hey, no offense taken here. I ask everyone, and it's actually nice to, oddly enough, it's actually nice to actually hear someone saying something other than distech. Admittedly, no one has said our product, which is fine. But normally it's distech, and then now we have an ALC. I'm like, oh, alrighty. Well,
I like Distech a lot. Let me be very clear. I like Distech a lot. I just don't find them, they don't have the installed base that a lot of the other vendors do. So I don't get to interact with them as much. I have a few clients with Distech stuff, and it's great.
Yeah,
but,
that's fair.
For me, the nightmare projects are all the 10-year-old buildings that no one can answer any questions about.
Yep.
And in that framework, it's going to either be, the vendors that are going to show up in a 10-year-old building. And so far, feels like ALC is pretty, tends to be the one we can plug in and roll. But yeah.
Well, good. Well, Andrew, that's all the questions I have. And I really do thank you for being on the show and taking time out of your day to speak on.
Oh, this is a delight. I joke about not, being far away from here, but I'm kind of like you. Like I am always wanting to build something, whether it's for work or not. So
yep.
I'm with you there, that if I wasn't building this, I'd be building something else, and I'd be really mad if it wasn't as hard as this is. So.
Yep. Agreed. Well, that's all we have for this episode. Remember to stay curious and be a part of the data solution. I'm Charles.
And I'm Matthew.
And this has been It's a Controls Problem.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks for joining us, Andrew.
I didn't realize you were the silent protagonist over there.